report.
Well, and once again, thank you, Mr. Covington. I just want to ask you a couple of questions. I kind of want to harken back to the incident on October 25th that involved Jason Miles. We've already seen the tape. It's actually part of the news and pretty much public record. But the question, I guess really the first question I have, is one that was brought up on the tape by the sheriff himself, and that was you had a list of charges, presumably. Why did you or your office drop the charges?
Well, there were 7 charges in total, starting with 2 alcohol-related offenses, driving under the influence, driving while impaired. Then you had lesser charges, less serious charges of fleeing and looting, not having your lights on, things of that nature.
Okay.
The very simple answer is that there just wasn't enough evidence. And as a prosecutor, I'm obligated to prosecute only those cases if I believe that there's evidence that a jury or a judge will conclude that the defendant's guilty, and that has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. We didn't have that here in this case.
Now, as far as what I'll call the things that I'm more aware of, and it would be the drunk and driving or the driving under influence.
Okay.
Was there anything in the report, or was there a sobriety check or blood tests that were done at all that would show that? I mean, that would seem to be the most obvious question.
Right. Here's what we had. I can talk about the evidence if you want me to. Number one is there were no field sobriety tests. I think everybody knows what field sobriety tests are. Stand on one leg, touch your nose, that type of thing. Okay? There were none done.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Okay.
Secondly, there was no breath or blood test done.
Now, was that because the defendant didn't, the officers didn't do it, or the defendant refused?
It's very clear that the defendant refused to give the breath test, which of course is his right. And it appears that I don't think he wanted to do any field sobriety test either. Although I'm not sure, given how these events unfolded, when that was going to be done. Okay.
Because clearly on the tape, there's no test that are
No, I mean, he's brought out of the car and they went from there. The other thing is, and you mentioned the tape, and talking about the evidence of sobriety or under the influence. You know, I've watched that video numerous times. I don't see evidence on the video of what I could say somebody was impaired. Now, again, we're watching a video from afar. We're not up on the person. But trust me, there are plenty of times when we've had cases where we don't have field sobriety tests or we don't have a breath test, where we have the video, and the video will demonstrate without anything else that the person is under the influence. You know, they're staggering, stumbling, whatever it is, their communications to the police officers are incoherent, you know, those type of things. None of that on this video. In fact, you do have a picture, which I don't believe has been on the news, but footage, I should say, not a picture, of where the defendant's sitting in the back of the car, the back of the police cruiser, and they have him videotaped. And he's communicating with the police officer in the front seat. And if you watch that, I mean, I don't know this person, never met him before in life, but he doesn't sound like he's slurring his words to me or speaking incoherently, those type of things that you would associate with being under the influence or impaired. So the video here doesn't help us prove intoxication or impairment.
I understand there's a video, but wouldn't there be a police report of some sort? I would assume there was a report that was done on it. Would there be a report that says, here's all the things that we think has shown that he's under the influence?
There is a report. It is lacking in any observations that are going to rise to the level of impairment.
No, when you say lacking, what do you mean?
Well, you know, police reports, they actually have a form that police officers use in Charles County, probably throughout the United States, that makes things easier for the officers, where you just check off boxes of impairment. You know, did the guy smell of alcohol? Did he have, was he unsteady on his feet? Would he have glassy eyes? You know, it's like 20 of them that just based on observations. Now, out of that 20, I think in this case there were 6 of the boxes checked off, only 6.
Out of how many?
Out of 20. I believe it's about 20, okay? And unfortunately, as far as getting evidence for this case is concerned, we find out after this case is over, after the case has been charged and we're reviewing the case for going forward on it, we find out from the defense that the client, after being released from custody that same day, goes to the hospital, or excuse me, goes to a doctor's office, and is diagnosed with a concussion and referred back to the emergency room because of a concussion. Well, I think all of us are familiar with concussions and the symptoms that a concussion can present, okay? And some of those same symptoms, for instance, being unsteady on your feet, maybe slurring your speech, maybe being argumentative, those type of things, can be attributed to a concussion. So even the very few observations that we have in this police report are easily undermined, and we're talking about a trial here, okay, are easily undermined by the doctor's report that this guy suffered a concussion.
So there was a doctor's report that he had a concussion.
Yes,
So that, yeah.
the defense attorney showed us that evidence.
Now, what about some of the? So we look at the alcohol incidents sort of separate. What about any of the other, I guess, 5 charges? I mean, was there anything else that looked like? I mean, I'm looking at it and going, okay, if he was doing all these things, I don't know, from what we can tell, that there would be a lot of the other charges. Was there enough to prosecute for any of those?
Well, generally speaking,
Or
well, first of
reason,
all,
or get a conviction?
first of all,
I guess would be
I guess I should throw in here. First of all, the drunk driving charges, if you will, are by far the most important for a situation like this. That's what somebody's going to focus on, and that's what I focused on. And I should point out that I'm the decision maker in all of this. This was not one of my assistants or deputy or anything. I made the decisions on this particular case. And the things underneath that are very much secondary. But if you want to go citation by citation, he was charged with 7 charges, 2 alcohol related. He had a speeding charge, a negligent driving charge, a reckless charge, not having his lights on, and a fleeing and eluding charge. The negligent and reckless charges, summarily, there's not evidence to come to that. So I don't even really to discuss those. Okay, and of course this is my opinion as a prosecutor, as somebody being involved in criminal law for more than 2 decades. Okay, I can't tell you how many of these cases I've handled. Probably over 1,000. I don't know. All right, and that's my opinion, my judgment as a prosecutor. All right, now the one charge that we do have that there's no question of is he didn't have his lights on. I think on two points in the videotape, it's pretty clear his lights were not on. Fleeing and eluding, we don't have a guy he doesn't run a stop sign, doesn't run a red light, isn't weaving in and out of traffic, hasn't been a danger to anybody else on the roadway that night. One of the things in the report does say that there was nobody else on the road. So at that time, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's not unusual. So I don't see the evidence of the fleeing and eluding getting there. Although that's closer than the other ones, with the exception of the headlights. Now, let me ask you this, Mr. Mason. We've already said that there's not evidence of the alcohol or anything. We've seen the videotape. We know that Mr. Miles is arrested, handcuffed, ends up being taken down to the commissioner's office, where commissioner's down to the detention center, where he's got to be processed, the whole process, and all that entails. Okay? So once I make the decision that these other charges are going to go away because there's not enough evidence, do you think Mr. Miles learned his lesson that night, that he should drive with his lights on?
I would think that there would be something that you would buy a car that makes sure that the lights come on automatically.
And once we get to that point, is it really worth the citizens or state's time to go forward with that puny charge? Remember, we're trying to do justice at all times. The man already went through that night. He had to go hire an attorney, all of these things. Again, we also want to teach people to not engage in the type of conduct they did. That's part of criminal law. As I said, I think Mr. Miles learned his lesson that night.
Let's turn for a minute and go back to the tape. Now, obviously, there's at least the news reports where he clearly has had some blood on his head. But the thing that I looked at, and it would strike me, is that however that may have occurred, there's somebody who says, watch the cameras, And then at some point, a police officer seems to block the camera. Would that be problematic as far as going further?
Well, there are a number of things that, quite frankly, and that's one of them, if not the number one thing, that torpedoes the case from the state's perspective. You know, juries and judges, they look at the larger circumstances sometimes, all right? And there are three things that are really troublesome and unexplainable to me, okay, about what happened out here that night. As you indicated, you do have somebody, I think on two occasions, I don't know if it's the same person or not, but you hear two voices, or two times somebody say, watch the cameras or watch the camera boss, okay? Not too long after that, you do have this officer come and sit on the hood of the only vehicle that is recording.
Right.
And that,
Right.
you know, we have a number of vehicles out there, there's only one camera going, okay? Sit on that vehicle. I don't know what was in that officer's mind. I do not know what his intent was. All I know is that watching the video, his body now obscures what's going on in front of him over where Mr. Miles has been taken out of the vehicle and handcuffed. Okay? That's a problem, okay? Because any defense attorney would be very easily be able to make the argument that he was trying to hide something that was going on over there. That goes to the injuries.
It does look
Right.
suspicious.
The injuries that you related. Okay? But there was more than that. And all of this factors into us going forward with the case, so I'm glad you brought it up. You have one, you know, watch the cameras, boss. Two, individual go over there and end up obscuring the camera. But you also have in the records, I believe it was on air already, that the dispatcher was speaking with one of the officers saying, hey, it wasn't really my car that needs to be towed. It's car one, which means the sheriff's car. And she says, okay, I'm going to edit things. I don't know why we got to edit things. And I don't think anybody does. And again, that's something that a defense attorney will grab a hold on. And then lastly, which again is inexplicable, the dispatcher, for whatever reason in the notes, places the sheriff being on the scene at the very end of the whole situation, when he is the very first car at the scene.
That was clear from what I could tell in the news reports that yes, the sheriff's car was first. And the sheriff's car is the one that needed the tow.
Right. His car was damaged apparently.
And that was damaged how?
Well, I believe on the video, he indicated, well, the audio, I should say, you can't see him at the time, says that we have to pit the car, which means it's, I don't know if it's slang, but it's a term which means, you know, I'm going to use my car to either ram him or do whatever.
And that's definitively the sheriff who says that.
Oh yes, I don't think there's any question that he doesn't deny it as far as.
But the account is edited so that his car isn't even there until the very end. Is what you're saying?
That's how it appears to me. So, given those irregularities, if you will, okay, the paucity, if I can use that word, or the small amount of evidence that we have of any impairment on behalf of Mr. Miles, and then these unexplained, inexplicable, and quite frankly, just strange actions on part of the investigating officers here. I just have to say it. There's no way that any attorney worth his salt would not be able to show some type of bias. And let's be real about it. The first thing out of the defense attorney's mouth is going to say, look, the only reason you want to go forward with this case, Covington and Sheriff, is because you injured this guy. You tried to cover it up, as we see on the video, and everything that you have to say is not true. Now, I'm not saying that any of that I just laid out there is true, but that's going to be the argument from a defense attorney. And quite frankly, given the evidence that we have here in the video and all these circumstances, it's going to be a powerful argument that, in my mind, would certainly result, along with the lack of evidence, in finding him not guilty.
Now, of the officers on the scene, to your knowledge, was there any discipline of any officers?
I mean, any discipline has to be referred to. I mean, the sheriff's office, that would be an internal matter. I wouldn't know about that.
I do know, if I recall, on the news reports, the sheriff mentions that there was the officer who,
Right, I heard that. Yes.
blocking the cameras, gets disciplined. But we do have it on good authority that the discipline was only after some of the news reports, but not actually in the state, the month of October or November of last year. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No. Again, I would refer any discipline questions, when it was done, what was done, you'd have to talk to the sheriff about that. I would say this, however, the sheriff did say he was disciplined, but I guess in hindsight, that officer sitting on that vehicle makes my decision more reasonable now, doesn't it? I mean, if the sheriff himself said, hey, you did something wrong, now, I mean, he's agreed that he's done something wrong, and now it looks like, to me, that everybody who questioned that behavior on part of the police officer kind of makes sense now, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. Well, I think that was pretty much what we needed to kind of clarify as far as some of the things we've seen on the news. I don't think I have any additional questions. I don't know if there's anything that... No, I think that's pretty much all we need.
All right, I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Covington.
All right.